Before I begin my sermon, I want to share a bit of a family concern with you. In the almost 11 years that I've been your pastor, I've very seldom had to share with you and ask your prayers concerning a family concern. But my uncle died this week in Nebraska. He was 97. If he lived till May, he would have been 98 years old. And he had the privilege of being completely alert, able to eat, able to walk, able to do crossword puzzles every day until the day he died. He had a stroke on Thursday morning and died Thursday afternoon. So I give thanks for his life. I wish he had waited till next week to die. It's Holy Week coming up. But I am going to the funeral. I'll be participating in it. And I leave Monday and come back Wednesday. The place where I'm going in Nebraska is about 2 hours from an airport. And so for a change, I'm not praying for snow. So I ask for your prayers for my traveling, for my family as we gather to give thanks for our patriarch who has died. This is kind of a rite of passage now that my uncle who died, his sister, my aunt, is still living. She'll be 90 in June. But we're getting to the point that my generation's the oldest generation. That's a new thing. So it's a rite of passage for all of us. And I also ask for your prayers that I just stay calm, even though it's Holy Week. And even though I have 3 sermons this coming week, just stay calm. That's the idea. So pray that for me as well. So it's Palm Sunday. One of the great days of celebration in the church here. When I was about 15 years old, gosh, it can't be 40 years ago, but nearly 40 years ago, the movie Jesus Christ Superstar came out. Don Johnson told me that I made him feel old today because when the movie came out, he was teaching high school Sunday school. And he said that they listened to the music and talked about it, and that he, too, knows all the lyrics for the movie Jesus Christ Superstar. And that's true of me. I've seen the movie many, many times. I've listened to the soundtrack over and over again, so that I know, not only do I know every lyric, I know the order in which the songs are sung in the musical, which I'm sure is true of some of you as well. I have said before, I think, during a Palm Sunday service, that movie shaped my understanding of Holy Week. And I think to a positive degree. And what happened in that movie was largely biblical and accurate in its depiction. So, I always think on Palm Sunday of that scene, and if you were here early, you saw it, it was on the screen, that scene of Jesus entering the holy city, and the crowds are shouting, and I like it because it's such a feeling of exuberance and joy and energy. And the depiction of the very last verse of today's gospel lesson in the movie, at least to me, is absolutely memorable. The Jewish council and the high priest Caiaphas in the movie are standing up on a scaffolding. Maybe you saw it a little bit earlier today. And Caiaphas has this deep bass voice. And as Jesus approaches, and Jesus looks totally at peace with himself and happy, and as he approaches, Caiaphas says, "Tell the rabble to be quiet. We anticipate a riot." Do you remember that? The crowd is much too loud. Tell the mob that sings your songs that they are fools and they are wrong. They are a curse. They should disperse. And then the music starts again. And Jesus responds, and he just is so non-defensive, so at peace. And he says to Caiaphas, "Why waste your breath moaning at the crowd? Nothing can be done to stop their shouting. If every tongue were stilled, the noise would still continue. The rocks and stones themselves would start to sing, and the music starts again, and it seems to me that at that moment it's entirely possible that the rocks and the stones could start singing." And then Jesus turns to the crowd and he blesses them. And he says, "Sing me a song, but not for me alone. Sing out for yourselves, for you are blessed. There is not one of you that cannot win the kingdom. The slow, the suffering, the quick, the dead." And then the music starts again, and it's all this celebration, and it's as if they're all wrapped in this bubble of joy. Until the crowd sings, "Hey, JC, won't you die for me?" And at that moment, the action in the movie stops. And you see the face of Jesus, and that sense of peace is somehow shattered. "Hey, JC, won't you die for me?" And the answer is, of course, yes, he will. Because it is for this moment that Jesus has come. And we get a clue to the truth of that in that detailed description in today's scripture of Jesus acquiring a donkey on which to ride into the holy city. By the way, that's one place where the movie is not historically accurate, because he's walking in the movie. But in the scripture today, we're given this detailed instruction, or detailed description, of Jesus going into the holy city and how he acquires this donkey. He tells his followers, a couple of them, where to go and what to look for, what kind of animal he wants, and even what to say if they're challenged. It's as if the whole thing is planned ahead of time. And we might say to ourselves, well, why doesn't he just say, "Go find me a donkey to ride on"? Or why doesn't he walk? He walked every place else, as far as we can tell as we read the scripture. Well, it's because Jesus has a particular scripture prophecy in mind. The prophet Zechariah has said to the people of Israel, "Your king will come, triumphant and yet humble, riding on a colt, the foal of a donkey, one that has never been ridden." And so Jesus knows that as he rides into the city on this donkey, people will remember that scripture. It's part of what they know. And they will connect Jesus to the king who comes triumphant. But the problem is this: what it means for Jesus to be king is different to different people. To Jesus, being king means conquering the power of sin and death. To many of his followers, his being king means he's going to lead a rebellion to overthrow the Romans. And of course his enemies, the Jewish council and Caiaphas, don't like the idea of a king at all, because that's going to upset the status quo that they are enjoying. And yet, it is for this that Jesus has come. For what's happening in that moment as he rides on that donkey and they acknowledge him as king, and for what happens later in the week. And that's why, even if it was somehow, the scene was somehow silenced, the rocks and the stones would sing. Because nothing will stop what's about to unfold from occurring. Just as if nothing can stop the lamenting that happens at the end of the week. And the fact is, for us, once we have celebrated Palm Sunday, Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday will follow, whether or not we take note of it. Because you see, Holy Week will come in the midst of spring break, in the midst of what do you call it, March Madness, in the midst of our hectic lives. And if we neglect to pray or praise or ponder or hear the story again, it will still be true that Jesus will have entered the holy city to shouts of Hosanna. And he will have washed the feet of his disciples as a sign of servanthood and love. And he will have shared a final meal with them. And he will have been arrested and put on trial and tortured and killed. And we will have been forgiven. There is not one of you who cannot win the kingdom. The slow, the suffering, the quick, the good. And so the fact of the matter is this. Holy Week is holy not because of us, but in some ways, in spite of us. We have the opportunity to choose whether or not to allow it to touch us, whether or not to allow it to move us or to transform us. But our choice won't change the love of Jesus. I'm reminded of a poem that was written by Walter Brueggemann. It goes like this. We will be your faithful people, more or less. We will love you with all our hearts, perhaps. We will love our neighbor as ourselves, maybe. We are grateful that with you it is never more or less, perhaps, or maybe. With you it is never yes and no, but always yes. Clear, direct, unambiguous, trustworthy. We thank you for your yes, come flesh among us. I told you I've seen the movie Jesus Christ Superstar, I don't know how many times. And yet when I watched it last week, I saw something I've never seen before. How can that be? It's just like reading scripture. It was at the very end of the movie. It was after the people in the movie have gotten on the bus to go home. And the very last scene in the movie is the cross of Christ with a bright sun behind it. It's setting, bright orange. And here's the thing I've never seen. In front of the cross, there is a shadowy figure. It's almost misty, that is walking away from the cross. I watched it 3 times last week, the ending, to make sure I was seeing what I was seeing. And it seemed to me that that figure must be the risen Lord. And I thought to myself, isn't that something? It's a reminder that Jesus can be present just like Holy Week can happen, and I might not even notice it. And yet, it doesn't mean that it's not true. And so, if we fail to proclaim Jesus as Lord this Holy Week, it won't change anything. Although, we may have missed our chance to be transformed. Because if every tongue were stilled, the noise would still continue. The rocks and stones themselves would start to sing.